You want to know what DPS is currently the best in Guild Wars 2 PvE? Today, we're gonna answer this question in form of a tier list. I did this video on my stream with my chat. Be sure to join us in future streams when we do other discussion and tier lists. But now, enjoy. A little bit subjective, it's really hard to rank DPS classes because DPS classes, yes, you can easily rank them just by the benchmark that Snowcross puts out. That is true, but I think it's not always about the DPS. Because you have to take into consideration, for example, how easy is it to play. Some classes are really hard to perform on because they are really gimmicky. So you have to have special conditions when they work. You have to play it really well. And you have to really know when to do your damage because your burst window is really small or something. And then you have classes that are really easy. You just press a few buttons and they do a lot of damage. And those are favored in this tier list. Furthermore, power builds are most of the time favored in terms of, even if it's the same damage than a condition build, because a condition build needs some time to ramp up classically, and ramp up time is most of the time not really that nice to have, so it's better to have direct burst damage than to have a delayed damage. And the next thing is ranged builds are better than melee builds. Don't get me wrong, in PvE you should always stack as a group or a squad on a place, but if a mechanic is happening or if you just need to avoid an attack or you can't damage the boss because he moved or whatever, a ranged build can keep DPS uptime while a melee build loses all DPS. So ranged builds are typically better in hard content. So that's just another thing that we need to consider. And the last thing that I would consider is how much support you can give even though you're a DPS build, because some DPS builds have the capability of giving your team still nice support or having nice utility skills that can help the fight or the mechanics. So that of course helps the build as well. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's start with the core classes, because in PvE it's really easy. The core classes are just easy. For almost all core classes, it's strictly better to run every single other elite spec for damage. That's just the case. They are balanced like that. That's how it works. Core Ranger, yeah, I mean, it's just a worse version of Untamed at this point. So we will not have any subjections there, I guess. Then Core Necromancer is just way too slow. Does not enough damage as well. Same goes for Core Warrior, even though Core Warrior is probably a little bit better than those two. Core Revenant is also just a joke. It was never designed in a way like that we really wanted to have the class build without any lead specs. Just we always had Herald in mind, so it's just not good. Core Guardian is actually one of the examples where it could be better. Core Guardian is at least C tier. You can deal quite a lot of damage. It's quite an easy build, maybe even higher. Just let's see how it goes. But this build is really easy and can perform quite a lot of damage. I would say that's helping him a lot. You just press. Actually, you can. There's a hammer build. You just press auto attack, and it's quite decent actually. Then Core Thief. Core Thief is actually quite decent as well. It might even be better because it has actually 42k benchmark, so it's actually a good build. But it's not, you know, insane in that sense because it's a condition build. So, okay, what did I miss? Core Mesmer. Okay, that's just a joke. It's not good. You only have 2 DPS trade lines most of the time, and all the other elite specs give you so much more damage. So it's just not good. Core Ele, you could actually play Core Elementalist. It's not horrible. But it's also, like I said, the core classes, you can of course make some DPS with them, but they're just in every single way inferior than the elite specs. And then we have Core Engineer. Yeah, the same. You have Kits, it's actually working rather okay, but it's probably also D tier. Thief, for example. Okay, so Thief is an interesting class. Thief is really selfish, but can deal quite a lot of damage. So how would I value that? It's really hard to value actually, because one of the top DPS builds is actually a Deadeye of any build. Deadeye is extremely strong, power or condition. But is it really an S tier or even an A tier build just because it deals a lot of damage? Because it's actually not that easy to perform most of the time. The raid build that is. But at the same time, it's also really annoying to play. But, and that's the good thing about it, there is a really easy Deadeye build that gets around 22k DPS, which is actually really good, and it's fully ranged, and it's just using one button. So this build is single-handedly carrying Deadeye into S tier. That's the insane part. This is a very easy build that you can play, and it's extremely strong. So that's why I would put this in S tier. And all the other DPS specs from Thief, so Daredevil, and even DPS Spectre. DPS Spectre is actually not that good. It doesn't have a lot of damage. It's a little bit tankier than the other one, but than the Core Thief. But it's actually not really good. I would say that DPS Spectre is worse than Core Thief, and I would say Daredevil is a good. It's quite hard to perform really well on it. It just does a lot of damage. Maybe low A tier, maybe. Let's see. Because the thing is, it's so much worse than a lot of other DPS builds because it's so selfish and it's actually not that easy. So there are some Thief mains that are really good at it, but most of the people are not really playing it that well, so it's not performing that well. I'm not really sure if you would use that above a lot of other A tier builds. So for Ranger, that's interesting. Ranger is some really good at DPS builds. I would say DPS Soul Beast is really good. It has a nice burst. It has, yeah, it's a good build. Maybe I would put actually it like that and Core Thief like here, Soul Beast like here. So I think DPS Spectre is actually C tier. It's not that good. So I think this is how I would place Soul Beast. Just because the burst damage is nice. It's actually not that hard to play. You don't have that much support, of course, because you're DPS build, but it's still quite good. I think DPS Untamed might also be A tier. Because it's a strong build. It does a lot of damage. His burst damage is also not that supportive for your team, but it's okay. It does a lot of damage, which is carrying it. And the same actually goes for Druid. Druid, you can play some Condi Druid, but it's not crazy good in terms of DPS. But at least as a Druid, you have some support. So the DPS might be low, but or lower, I don't know. I think all of them are A tier for me. You will see the idea here. Most of the builds that I think are really good go into S tier. Most of the builds that are really bad go into B tier and lower. And A tier is for me the build where you can, just a really big amount of builds is in A tier because you can use them. They are not special in a way that they have some really nice capabilities of carrying the group, but they are really useful. They deal a lot of damage. That's it. You know, everything that doesn't deal a lot of damage and is not useful for your group will go just lower than B tier. Maybe I have to put Daredevil back up in A. It's really hard to tell. They are all the same somewhat. Next thing, Elementalist. So Elementalist is actually quite easy. Tempest, S tier. Tempest is S tier. It does a lot of damage, Power Tempest, and is really easy to play for a DPS build, especially for an Elementalist build. So that's really easy. Really good build. Yeah. I can't say much more about it. It's just really good. I actually have a YouTube video about it. Be sure to check it out if you want to know more about the build. And then Catalyst. is also really strong. DPS Catalyst, extremely high damage, and probably the most highest damage that we currently have. It's not that easy to perform on, but if you can make it work, it's insane how much more damage you deal. So that's really good. That's why I would put it in A tier, even though I would say it's quite hard to perform on it. So it's falling a bit off because it's not that, you know, self-explanatory and it's like working so smoothly like Power Tempest. Power Tempest is also that good because it's somewhat ranged, and therefore you can actually make it work when you have to do mechanics that you can't melee the boss anymore. And then we have Weaver. Yeah, Weaver is just sad because Weaver is quite complex. And the highest damage build that you have is a 44k condition Weaver. What does that mean? Yes, you can deal quite high damage, but at the same time, your damage is condition based and you still have to do a lot of work for it, you know, which makes this build really bad. It's not you know, it's just you don't get rewarded for the amount of effort you put in. It's a big problem with this build. I think that's Elementalist. So now let's go to Warrior. Warrior is in a sad spot when it comes to damage. The highest damage build that you have is a Power Berserker at 43k. I would say this build is good. It's a melee build. It's not particularly crazy. It doesn't have that much support, but it deals consistent damage. And yeah, it's just I would say a good build. It's similar to Daredevil, I would say. Sad part now is that the other two elite specs are actually worse than that, in the sense that they deal less damage and are either harder to play or just less useful. I would say Spellbreaker goes into A tier as well, maybe into B tier, just because it's less damage and doesn't have that much more value than Berserker. Maybe both of them go into high B tier. They are not crazy in that sense, you know. They just deal damage and melee focus, less damage than the ones up here. I don't really think it's good. And then we have Bladeswan. Bladeswan can be good if you play it really well, but the thing is, it's really skill dependent. You have to especially know when the mechanic happens, when there are phases, when you can use your Dragon Trigger and you get it through. So this one is really hard. I would say that's actually not a particularly good build. It's B tier, maybe even C tier for me, because it's just not working that easy for most people. You can't make it work that easily. And then we have Engineer. So Engineer is interesting. There is a really high damage Holosmith build. It's also quite hard, but if you can perform in it, the damage is actually really, really there. So I would put it in A tier, because it's really nice to succeed on it. But at the same time, I would say it's definitely not S tier, because it's high damage, yes, but it's not easy to get. And it's a condition build. You have some ranged options that makes up for it, but it's not perfect. I would say Condition Mechanist is actually for me definitely A tier, just because it's really easy to play and it deals a lot of damage. So this is probably, you see the pattern here. Builds that are easy to play I value more highly, even though they have less damage, because it's, in my opinion, if you have an easy build and you perform really good on it, it's way better in most fights than having a hard build and you perform mediocre on it, because then you will not get the damage numbers that it could be. Power Scrapper is actually also quite good. Let me check, I don't want to tell you wrong numbers. Power Scrapper, 42k, 43k. So this build is also quite nice. You have some nice utility with it. I would say it's definitely with Holo, probably a little bit higher than Holo, but those builds are actually quite nice if you have them. Not a lot of people actually play Engineer as a DPS, just because it's not that common. I don't know why, but it's not that common. But it's fine. It's definitely a good one. Yeah, it's true. That's a good point, Bakuzo, that mech has the problem with the mech, that it can die, and then you have a problem in the sense that your main damage source, or at least the big damage source that you have, is lost. Still, I would say it's a good build. Okay, next is Necromancer. So we have Harbinger. It's a really good DPS build. There is a conditioned Harbinger build, and there's even a power Harbinger build, and both of them are really good. They deal a lot of damage. They are almost at 45k, which means this build is really good, but it's also quite squishy, and it's also not that easy. There are easier builds. So if I compare it, for example, with Reaper, I would say a Reaper is tankier, might be easier to play, and is a little bit less damage. But because you're tankier, I would put it higher. That's why I think this makes sense to put Harbinger lower than Reaper, even though the damage is higher from Harbinger. So Scourge, DPS Scourge is actually only at 40k DPS. However, it is giving barrier, and it's giving permanent, it's 100% range DPS, or 99. And this makes it really useful in hard fights. You have Epidemic as well. I would say this is S tier for me. Even though the DPS is low in comparison to the other DPS builds, what you can bring to your team baseline, so you have Condi Cleanse, you have Barrier, you have Corrupt, you have CC, immense amounts of CC actually, you have crazy just range damage. It's a really good build. It's a really good build. You don't need always to have the highest DPS. If you can make it work, sure, highest DPS might be better, but most of the time Scourge will perform better, especially in packs. So this is S tier for me, for sure. Let's continue with Revenant. Revenant is in a weird spot as well, because it's really... Revenant doesn't have that many builds when it comes to DPS builds. So you can play a condition variant, condition renegade build that has quite some damage, but it is a shadow of its former self. It's not that good anymore. And it's a Condi build, the rotation is quite smooth, but it's not as good as it was. I would still put it in A tier, just because it deals nice damage. Sadly, it's a condition damage build. So, yeah. The support, you have some support, you have some CC if you really need it, but it's, yeah, it destroys your rotation, but anyway, it's useful. Then we have Vindicator. So Power Vindicator is a melee build that deals a lot of damage, but you have no CC, you have only damage, you have no support. Not at all. So I would say that brings it into E tier. It's just really sad. The damage is lower than a lot of other builds that have more support, and it's melee and it's power. That's good, but I would say both of them actually go here. It's not particularly crazy. That's the sad part. Exactly. So you lose your good point by Winslow there. You lose your dodge capabilities just to deal more damage. You have to use it because it's in your rotation. So if you need to dodge a mechanic, it will either fuck up your rotation, or you will just not have the endurance to dodge. So that makes this build really hard to play in some encounters, and it doesn't reward you with higher damage, because you could just, for example, go for a Power Scrapper and would have been better. So yeah, just sad. And then we have Power Herald, which is sadly really bad DPS, but it has some capabilities of supporting the group with boons, even though it's a power build, DPS build. But does it really help that much in the current meta? Because most of the time you still have all the boons and the DPS is really low. The Condi build is actually better. I would say it's a B tier build for me. Yeah, the Condi build is better, but it's still not crazy. Let's go to Guardian. So, DPS Dragon Hunter is also not that good anymore. It was really good at one point, but it's a long time gone. And it's actually, in Fractals, it's good. It's because it has a high burst damage. But in every other game mode, it's not that good. So I would put it at the end of A tier, just because it's dealing okay damage. And it's not too hard to play. It's not easy, but it's not too hard. Then you have DPS Firebrand, which is really interesting. DPS Firebrand is actually dealing quite a lot of damage. Not that hard to play. I would also put it in A tier. It's a condition build, it's quite melee favored, so that makes it not that good, but it's not too hard to play and you have a lot of tools in your kit. You can reflect, you can cleanse, you have healing if you really need it. So that makes it really good in progression as well. Of course, I would say most of the time you would rather have a quickness Firebrand than a full DPS one, because the full DPS one doesn't bring more than the quickness one, but still. And then we have Power Willbender and Condition Willbender. Both of them are actually really high DPS. They have some movement skills in there, but they are, the Condition one especially is second highest DPS that you can get, 46k. So it makes it a really good build, and it's melee, but quite fun in my opinion. So I would say A tier as well. You see, A tier is just filled with a lot of specs because they are just useful. And then we have Mirage. DPS Mirage is not that good, sadly. I would say it's hard to play. If you're playing the X variant, it's really hard. If you're playing the Staff variant, it's okay. But the damage is not crazy. Then we have Chronomancer, Power Chronomancer. It's quite hard to play, and it doesn't reward you with that much because we have the next one coming up. Virtuoso is actually better. So I would say it's a B tier build for me. You can play it, sure, if you enjoy it, but it's hard to play. It has some ramp up time, and for a power build it's really weird. And at the same time, it's not that much damage, you know. So Virtuoso is just better. Virtuoso, S tier. Clearly, you can play Condivert, which is extremely strong, has a lot of baked in utility with invulnerability, with really good self-healing, and you can even change your utility skills without too much of a DPS loss. Link, Portal, you name it, it's really good. And even the power build is even better when it comes to damage. Fourth place, and it's really, really strong. And also really fluid and fast-paced, really fun to play. And most circumstances, it's probably one of the best DPS builds that you can play in pucks, just because it's so much damage and you have self-sustain as well. It's really good. So that is my final tier list for DPS, I would say. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. DPS is highly subjective, you know, it's not, I can't make an objective tier list because then I would just put the benchmark here, and that's boring. I just wanted to give you my feedback regarding the usefulness, you know, not only the DPS, but that's still subjective.